My name is Jennifer Nevin, and I am a marketing manager at Brooks Publishing. Thank you all for joining us for How to Build and Lead a High-Quality Preschool Inclusion Program, presented by Dr. Erin Barton, Assistant Professor in the Department of Special Education at Vanderbilt University, and by Dr. Barbara j.smith, Research Professor, Director of the Center for Evidence-Based Practice in Early Learning School of Education and Human Development at the University of Colorado, Denver. That's a mouthful. And today's webinar is sponsored by Brooks Publishing. Founded over 35 years ago, Brooks Publishing has published over 500 books and resources for people who work with children with developmental disabilities or learning delays. You may know us from some of our screeners and assessments. We're the publishers of ASQ, ASQ SE2, AEPS, and then the newly released TILs. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with that. Okay, and since you are a member of this webinar, you can save 20% on all early childhood resources, including the Preschool Inclusion Toolbox. All you're going to need to do is enter the code EDWEB20, and that expires on April 22nd. You can go to brookspublishing.com and order your copy today. Now, I know we have a lot of attendees here for this webinar, but I'm not sure if everyone is a member of our EdWeb community. So make sure you head over to EdWeb and you check out the Teaching All Students Practical Strategies for Inclusive Classrooms, and then you can find invitations to our upcoming webinars, webinar recordings, and resources such as this one, CE quizzes, and online discussions. So the link is right there for you to join the community. And now it's all about that certificate. So if you're attending the live presentation, your certificate will be emailed to you within 24 hours. And then if you are viewing the recording or have joined by phone, you will need to join the Teaching All Students Practical Strategies for Inclusive Classrooms community, and then take the quiz to earn your certificate. And I am honored to introduce two of the leaders in the early childhood field that will be presenting our webinar today. Dr. Erin Barton, she teaches courses in early childhood special education on evidence-based assessment and intervention practices for young children with disabilities and their families and single case research design. Erin is a board-certified behavior analyst and has worked with children and families in homes, schools, and clinics. Her research interests include early intervention practices for young children with or at risk for disabilities in natural settings and professional development with early childhood practitioners. She also serves on several editorial boards and is an active scholar with over 30 publications in major journals. And we also have Dr. Barbara Smith. Dr. Smith has held early childhood special education positions for the past 35 years, including early childhood teacher, executive director of the Division of Early Childhood, counsel for exceptional children, and a program specialist. She has served as a consultant on state and national early childhood policy, expert witness in right to treatment litigation, prepared and delivered legislative testimony to the Congress as well as state legislators, and has worked with many parent and professional groups and their state policy efforts. Dr. Smith has authored over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles and 15 books and chapters. She is currently co-principal investigator of an OSEP-funded doctoral program at UCD in early intervention and early childhood special education policy and collaborative leadership. Okay, so now I'm going to be turning it over to Dr. Erin Barton.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm going to just get us started and give a brief overview of the webinar for today. We are going to go through the toolbox that Barbara and I collaborated with multiple different people in the development of this toolbox. And we are going to go through the toolbox essentially chapter by chapter and outline all of the relevant features of the chapter and all of the resources and tools that are available in the chapter. That will provide us with the structure, the framework for outlining how to support high quality inclusive preschool programs. So we are going to go through the book chapter by chapter. Before we start going through chapter by chapter, though, Barbara is going to give a brief overview of what got us interested in writing this toolbox at this time. And so she's going to give a brief overview of the state of preschool inclusion right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thanks, Erin. So Erin and I are both, and have been for a long time, acutely aware of what the real facts are about preschool inclusion, and we understand that there's a lot of misinformation in the field. We're acutely aware that the science behind preschool inclusion is very clear. Preschool inclusion is effective if it's high quality. We're also very aware that laws support preschool inclusion, and indeed IDEA and the Office of Special Ed Programs have been very clear that inclusion and inclusive services, when they are appropriate, are the preferred service delivery of early childhood special ed and related services. And we're also aware that the profession itself, early childhood special ed and early intervention, and early childhood education, are clear that the organizations representing early childhood education and early childhood special education have very public and strong positions that preschool inclusion is the right thing to do. And yet, even with all the research, the strong legal background, and the early childhood profession itself saying that we should be engaging in quality preschool inclusion, in the last 27 years, preschool inclusion has increased only 5.7%. So I'm going to say that again, that in the United States, preschool inclusion has increased less than 6% in 27 years. And recently, in recognition of this very slow progress, the U.S. Departments of Education and Health and Human Services have developed and issued a policy statement on preschool inclusion. And the purpose of that joint policy statement is clearly stated. It is for increasing the inclusion of infants, toddlers, and preschool children with disabilities in high-quality early childhood programs. So Erin and I, when we found out the fact that preschool inclusion has increased only less than 6% in almost 30 years, we wanted to find out why. So we developed a national survey looking at the question, are there challenges? And of course there are challenges. So what are the challenges impacting the inclusion of young children with disabilities? And what are some possible solutions to those challenges? We had over 238 people respond to this electronic survey, and they represented 32 states and 1 territory. This survey was similar to a survey that was conducted in 1993. So if you look at the typical challenges that people identified both in 1993 and in 2014, attitudes and beliefs. So the attitudes and beliefs of preschool inclusion are a challenge. Fiscal and contracting issues are a challenge. Knowing how and setting up procedures for approving non-public school settings for the placement of children with IEPs. Transportation issues are a challenge. Differing curricula among special education and regular early childhood education is a challenge. Personnel qualifications are a challenge. Program quality and conflicting policies. So in 1993, the number one challenge was personnel issues. So ensuring that personnel have the competence and the qualifications to provide services to young children with special needs. And attitudes and beliefs were number two in the ranking of challenges to preschool inclusion. In 2014, attitudes and beliefs rose to be the number one challenge. So let me say that again. In 2014, most people across the United States identified the attitudes and beliefs about preschool inclusion as the most significant challenge to adopting preschool inclusive services. So once we completed the survey and we had this information from around the United States about what's standing in the way of preschool inclusion, given that we have strong research base, a strong legal base, and a strong professional base, what's standing in the way? Erin and I decided what we needed was to try to get the tools that we know work to the local school districts so that when local school districts are making those important decisions about where young children with disabilities and IEPs are receiving their special ed related services, that they have the tools that they need to place those children in inclusive settings and ensure that their special ed related services are provided there and that their unique needs are met. So we thought a lot about what are these tools and how can we convey them and put them in a format that would be usable at the local decision-making level. So that is the toolbox. So we will be talking about this toolbox and today and how you can use the tools in this toolbox. So the goals of the toolbox are to describe high quality preschool inclusion, because if it's not high quality, quite frankly, all bets are off. We don't know the research that shows the important effects of preschool inclusion are based on high quality services. So personnel who have the competence, the environments that meet all children's educational needs. So high quality preschool inclusion. The second goal of the toolbox was to identify possible challenges to preschool inclusion that were identified in our survey, but more importantly, to provide you with what the supportive policies and procedures and other solutions to those challenges were also identified. Thirdly, a goal is to help school district preschool inclusion teams develop and implement an action plan for moving preschool inclusion forward. Fourth, to suggest strategies for developing and implementing individualized education programs for high quality preschool inclusion placements. So I want to talk a little bit about what's in the toolbox. There are fact sheets, and the fact sheets are there so that you can copy them and use them to raise awareness in your community and in your school and in your programs and with families about the importance. There are fact sheets about the importance of preschool inclusion, what the developmental and educational outcomes are in high quality preschool inclusion. There are fact sheets about what IDEA in fact says, what the laws say about preschool inclusion, as well as other handouts you can use to build awareness and support, because remember, the number one challenge in the nation is around beliefs and attitudes. So we have given you what we think are important summaries and tools that you can copy and use in your community to help people understand the real facts about preschool inclusion and why it's important and what the law says about it, and that it is a preferred service delivery system. Also in the toolbox are templates for checklists, templates for making decisions, templates for identifying challenges, templates for action planning, all kinds of templates and samples of materials to use in your process of developing a system of preschool inclusion. There are little boxes and other graphics that summarize key points and key tools and how to use them. There are what we call quote unquote tips for success. So little snippets from professionals in the field giving guidance and good ideas for preschool inclusion efforts. There are reflection questions and application questions at the end of each chapter and within each chapter, so that as you and your team are moving ahead in developing preschool inclusion services and using this toolbox, as you walk through and use the tools in each chapter, there are places to stop and reflect on your work and to ask yourself some application questions. These tools and questions are also in there. You can use this toolbox as a professional development module. Each chapter on the Brooks website, each chapter has a set of PowerPoints. You can download those PowerPoints. You can download this template that we're using today on these PowerPoints. You can download the PowerPoints and the template, all of the duplicable fact sheets, and as each chapter presents the information, you can use that in your own professional development efforts in your community. And then you can use the reflection questions and application questions in your professional development activities. So let's get started. So here's your book. Hopefully many of you have it in front of you. And I'm going to use the introduction as a real good example of these kinds of tools. So the introduction, if you look at the first introduction, the page number 1 of the introduction, there's a box. Every chapter starts with a box that says tools from the toolbox. So we really want you to think of this as you open this big toolbox. It's almost like a fishing box. You've opened your toolbox, and what are you going to find in there in the introduction? Well, you're going to find several appendices of fact sheets to use in your awareness activities. So, for instance, you're going to find a fact sheet on page 7 that summarizes the research base behind preschool inclusion. So we hope you're going to copy this off, either out of the book or off the website, and you're going to use this thorough, annotated summary of the research behind preschool inclusion. We hope you're going to copy that out and use it with family members, with teachers, with administrators, with early childhood programs in your community, to begin the discussion about why is it so important to teach children with disabilities in settings with their typical peers. Another fact sheet in the introduction on page 15 is a verbatim cut and pasted set of provisions from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Verbatim, cut and pasted out of IDEA, that shows exactly what IDEA says that supports preschool inclusion, and more than supports preschool inclusion, it makes it very clear that inclusion services in regular early childhood settings is the preferred setting under IDEA. You will also find after that a letter from the Office of Special Ed Programs, OSEP, describing from the director of the Office of Special Ed Programs why IDEA prefers inclusion. So that is a letter from the feds saying we prefer inclusion and this is why. And then after that, also now all of these are reproducible. We hope you will duplicate them and use them in your own awareness raising activities. After that is a copy of the DEC, Division for Early Childhood, and NAEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children, joint position statement about preschool inclusion and why it's important. So all of these are fact sheets to use in your awareness and education efforts about preschool inclusion. And then there is a personal story by Linda Frederick about her lifelong efforts to include her son from the time he was born, and now he's a young adult. And that, again, is a story that many parents can tell, but in this case, it's Linda's story that you can use in your awareness raising activities. Chapter 1. So you open your inclusion toolbox to chapter 1, and on page 33, which is the first page of chapter 1, again, you have another box there that says, what are the tools from your toolbox in this chapter? And so this chapter summarizes the national data about the slow progress of preschool inclusion that you can use as you talk to people. There's also this handout, Inclusion for Preschool Children, What We Know and What We Should Be Doing. Again, it's reproducible and it's in a very user-friendly format for you to help people understand why preschool inclusion is important. And in chapter 1, we really talk about the importance of high quality inclusion and why inclusion works when it is high quality. So we talk about high quality inclusive classrooms and that they're related to positive outcomes. We summarize the fact that preschool inclusion has been at the heart of policy and professional standards and research for decades. So I know that Erin and I never talk about inclusion anymore without prefacing it with high quality inclusion. Again, you'll find an application activity in chapter 1 that you can use in your professional development activities. You can use it in your own self-reflection. You can use it with your preschool inclusion team, which we recommend be your very first step, that you develop a preschool inclusion team that's going to help you move preschool inclusion forward in your community. So this is an application activity. You can find preschool inclusion data at this website. You can look at the data from your own state, and then you can have a community conversation about it. Effective components of high quality preschool inclusion are outlined in chapter 1. And those components are these are the components that come from the research about the powerful outcomes from preschool inclusion, and they're related to these components. That preschool inclusion, the services, the strategies, the teaching is intentional. It's sufficient and supported interactions between peers with and without disabilities. One of the things we know about preschool inclusion and the positive outcomes that we get from preschool inclusion is when those interactions between the typical peers and the children with disabilities are supported and intentional. And that's something that you need to build into your professional development initiatives, is what are the strategies to support the interactions between peers. that there are specialized and individualized support. So a child's IEP is carried out in that setting. There's family involvement, integrated and interdisciplinary services and collaborative teaming, and those integrated services are in that classroom. They are not pull out. That there's a focus on critical sociological outcomes. In other words, what are those important social outcomes that we see from a preschool inclusion? So making friends, having peer-to-peer support, effective ongoing professional development. So there may be workshops to support teachers at first, but then there's ongoing in-classroom coaching and support to those teachers, and ongoing program evaluation that looks at, is this working for the individual child? Is it working for the teacher? Is it working for all the children in the classroom? So also in chapter 1, you can't see this very well on the screen, but this is one of the first kinds of templates we have. We offer you in chapter 1 a preschool inclusion self-checklist that you and your preschool inclusion team, who might be teachers, administrators, family members, related services folks, people from the community, from Head Start and Child Care, be your team, and that you can do this checklist as to where you are in preschool inclusion efforts. Finally, at the end of every chapter, we have a case study, and the case study follows the Maceo family as they and their school plan a preschool inclusion service system for one of their children. And at the end of each chapter, it shows how the family and the school has used those tools in that chapter. A tip for success is also in chapter 1, that your team needs to remember that there are lots of opportunities in the community. If you don't have regular early childhood in your school district program, you do in your community. And the OSEP letter makes it clear that you need to be reaching out to the community, to Child Care and Head Start, to build an inclusive system, whether it's on your campus or in Child Care and Head Start in your community. Part of what we propose in the book is that the community have a preschool inclusion vision. Chapter 2. So chapter 2 reviews the survey, and so when you are describing to others about this national survey and what the typical challenges are and what the solutions are, you have all the information in this chapter that describes the survey and the results. Also in this chapter, we have listed all the solutions. So we have a template that lists the kind of challenges that were identified and all the solutions to that challenge. Perceptions of policy and resource challenges, that's an example. So this would be something that you and your team can fill out if you feel that some resource challenges are at work in your area. You can write what kinds of challenges they are and any comments and plans for changing those challenges. And the key thing to remember as you're building preschool inclusion is that there are lots of potential places for children to receive their services. They can be in the public school early childhood programs like Title I or pre-K, but they also could be in Head Start, in Child Care, or other community early childhood settings as you build your partnerships with the community. A tip for success from this chapter is think creatively when planning preschool inclusion. Think out of the box. Where can children be, and how can we provide their services there? And as someone has told us in our work, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Chapter 3, creating policies and procedures. So chapter 3, we provide some background information and some very nitty-gritty strategies for working as a group, as a team to develop preschool inclusion. And one of the things that we recommend is when you're first starting to work as a team, that you take a few minutes and you think about what makes teaming work and what has made teaming not work. So we've all been involved in teams and meetings that we didn't feel like were really worth our time. But we've also been in teams and meetings that were really effective. So we build a lot of the strategies in this chapter around what works for teaming. And let me back up. As I mentioned, one of the first things we suggest in the book is that you and a group of people work together to plan preschool inclusion services. And so as you build that team, in order for it to be effective, we believe there are certain things that you will need to pay attention to. There will need to be objective facilitation. That does not mean you need an outside consultant. Whoever's running that meeting that day is objective. Effective meeting strategies, and we outline those in this chapter. Building trust, building a shared vision about preschool inclusion, and having ground rules. We meet on time, we get out on time, we write down all of our decisions, we have shared decisions, nobody's making all the decisions for the team. All of this is outlined in this chapter. So we select the right members, we have suggestions for how to do that, we establish team logistics and ground rules, we have shared decision-making activities, we have samples of what those look like, and how to develop a shared vision, how to develop written action plans, and how to evaluate your work as a team. And then we have a primer about policies and how to make policy, how to change policy, how to identify the challenges in your area, and how to know what kind of challenge it is, and how to change that challenge, whether it's a policy or a procedure or attitude. We have a little policy 101 section on this. And then we go through 10 basic steps that we know work for changing policies and procedures that result in preschool inclusion services. We have all kinds of templates for your team to use as you're identifying challenges and developing strategies for changing those challenges. And again, we then take the Maceo family, the team that was developed to create the preschool inclusion for that family, and what their steps were. Erin.
Thank you, Barbara. So the flow of our book is such that chapter 4, so now you have identified what high quality preschool inclusion looks like. What are the effective components? You've done a self-assessment. You've evaluated where your program or your district is regarding establishing high quality preschool programs. You've identified perhaps some challenges and some strengths or some solutions to address those challenges that are potentially interfering with the high quality inclusive service delivery systems for preschoolers. And if needed, you have changed or perhaps reinterpreted some policies that were some existing policies. And now it's time to start thinking about professional development and who are the professionals, who are the early childhood special educators, the early interventionists, the early childhood educators, the teaching assistants, the related service providers who are going to be delivering services in these high quality early childhood preschool inclusive environments. So our take on our approach to professional development, and really our approach to establishing, scaling up, and sustaining high quality preschool inclusive preschool settings is guided by implementation science. So implementation science is the study of how evidence-based practices and the knowledge behind those practices and the principles that guide those practices are used and sustained in real life. So implementation science allows for you to identify what contextual factors, so what factors exist in the environment that are going to strengthen your ability to sustain high quality preschool environments or perhaps need to be changed. And so we use implementation science as the framework to guide how we approach professional development. And what we know through implementation science is that the use of evidence-based practices, that evidence-based practices need to be implemented in high quality, are implemented in high quality, inclusive preschool environments. They're related to improved outcomes for children. And implementation science helps us identify ways to ensure that they are implemented in high quality, in inclusive settings, such that they become high quality, inclusive settings for preschoolers. So what we know through the use of implementation science is that essentially trainings in and of themselves don't work, that we need to have high quality systems of coaching or follow-up to support staff, to support professionals in the implementation of evidence-based practices in inclusive environments with young children with disability, with all young children, actually. So what we know through some of the work of Joyce and Showers and many other researchers have shown data that supports this as well, training in and of itself doesn't work. So we need to have follow-up support and coaching, effective, high-quality follow-up support and coaching to ensure that professionals have the support they need to create and maintain high-quality environments, inclusive environments, which means that they're implementing evidence-based practices in the environments. So Chapter 4 goes through steps to effective professional development. So what we know through the work of implementation scientists and through many of other researchers within early childhood, within the field of early childhood and the broader field of special education, is that coaching is that we need to have high quality workshops, perhaps where we are delivering the knowledge, and then we need to supplement it with ongoing coaching and use performance-based feedback to ensure that staff knows what they're doing well, and feedback that ensures they get the support they need to deliver effective services and implement evidence-based practices with high fidelity and inclusive environments. We have multiple different tools within this chapter that can be used, that can be duplicated. They also can be adaptive. If these tools don't work exactly as they are, they can be adapted for use in your program and your system. So this is an example of a coaching performance feedback form where a coach might go into a classroom, observe a teacher, and take some notes in order to provide effective feedback to the teacher, the educator in the classroom. There are multiple different strategies throughout this chapter that outline things to think about when designing effective professional development systems. And the key message from this chapter is that when you are designing high quality inclusive environments, you need to consider and develop effective systems of professional development to support them. Otherwise, your high quality inclusive environment is unlikely to be sustainable or unlikely to scale up as well. So then the next chapter, so now we've identified an effective system of professional development. And the next chapter talks about evidence-based practices. So it's not a comprehensive overview of evidence-based practices because that would be several rooms full, I'm afraid, of documents, but it is an overview of general frameworks or principles that can be used to guide how you think about evidence-based practices for implementation in high-quality inclusive classrooms. And so we start with the Division for Early Childhood Recommended Practices. So Barbara Smith was the leader behind the commission that gave us these recommended practices in 2013. And we were thrilled that they were disseminated right as we were getting ready to publish this book so that we could actually include them in the book. So that was really exciting. So we talk a little bit about the Division for Early Childhood recommended practices, which are available on the Division for Early Childhood website. I mean, those practices should guide all of the practices that are implemented within the early childhood, the preschool, high quality preschool inclusive environments. So then we give a little overview of blended instructional approaches. Blended instructional approaches can be really helpful when you're implementing evidence-based practices for children in preschool environments who have a range of developmental needs or functional repertoires. And so we talk a little bit about blended instructional approaches. And the key point when discussing blended instructional approaches is that the early childhood special educators need to make sure that they're designing the environment and delivering instruction such that each child receives sufficient numbers of learning opportunities to ensure that they are learning and developing appropriately over time. And that's going to be an individualized decision. It's going to depend on the individual child as well as the specific goals and outcomes that you're working on. We talk a lot about accommodations and modifications because we know that in preschool and high quality inclusive preschool environments, there's going to be a range of accommodations and modifications. And so we outline different accommodations and modifications that would be useful. And we identify them using the building blocks for instruction, which is also a Brooks book. And so we actually should have put that reference up here, but anyway. It's the Sandel and Schwartz building blocks for instruction book that is also available from Brooks. And we use their framework for accommodations and modifications to talk about adaptations that can be made within the environment. We also talk about assistive technology. We go over high-tech versus low-tech assistive technology, which can include augmentative or alternative communication systems that might be needed and used with young children with disabilities. We also talk about differentiated instruction, and again, we give an overview of differentiated instruction and how it can be implemented effectively to support a high-quality inclusive preschool environment. We also provide an overview of the principles behind response to intervention, and so this allows for professionals in early childhood educators to think about both assessment and instruction in a tiered approach such that each child is receiving a sufficient number of learning opportunities to ensure that they develop and grow over time. And then I saw somebody had asked a question about if we address behavior, and in fact we do in this chapter talk quite a bit about behavior. And so we provide an overview of the pyramid model. And the pyramid model is a promotion, prevention, and intervention framework that was designed to address challenging behavior, reduce challenging behavior, and also perhaps as importantly, to promote social emotional competence. So our framework for inclusion uses a pyramid model approach within the inclusive models. We provide a table that outlines the different examples of how pyramid model can be used within high quality inclusive environments. Chapter 6 is a chapter that includes lots of examples of high quality inclusive assessment tools. So we provide some examples of tools that can be used to evaluate your classroom, so at the classroom level. And we provide some tools that can be used to assess the child's experience within the inclusive environment. And there are many different assessments, many different tools available out there, and some of them are free. And so the chapter gives examples of each of these tools and how they can be used to support a high quality inclusive environment. And this is a table that is probably unreadable from where you are, but it provides some examples of checklists that can be used to assess the inclusive nature of the classroom. Then the 7th chapter, and I saw there are lots of questions that would be answered through this 7th chapter. The 7th chapter really provides an exhaustive and very helpful, systematic process for thinking about and making individualized child placement decisions. And it was developed with IDEA in mind. So it was developed with how the regulations are written. And so it's guided by three main principles. The first one is that we consider the least restrictive environment and the full range of options that might involve. That we are always thinking about high quality preschool environments, and that we are making individualized placement decisions for individual children, that we're not just putting children somewhere because there's a space open. This is another probably unreadable from where you are table, but this is a table that my co-authors developed where they outline how to use DEC recommended practices to guide individualized placement decisions. And it's an excellent table that is very helpful for answering a lot of the questions that I saw in the chat regarding making individualized placement decisions. We have some tools. As I said, we lay out, just like the Toolbox was developed with this kind of systematic process in mind, the Chapter 7 provides a systematic process for thinking about and making individualized placement decisions. The process itself is going to be different with each child, each family that you're working with, but we give tools, we provide tools for helping the team think about, along with the family is a member of the team, think about and consider all the different placement options and then make a decision regarding the placement for an individualized child. So this is an example of one of the tools. It's a form for considering different placement options. We also walk through thinking about different advantages and limitations of certain options, and then one potential helpful way of thinking about options is to rank them along with the family. And then this chapter ends with the Maceo family again. And so each chapter ends with a blurb about the Maceo family, as Barbara had mentioned. And this chapter is where we kind of provide the end of the story, and we talk about where they ended up putting Raphael, where they placed him. Each chapter also has some discussion questions. The discussion questions, as Barbara mentioned, are designed to be answered with your inclusion team. So they're also meant to facilitate discussions to improve high-quality preschool inclusive options. And then Chapter 8, the final chapter, brings it all together. It's the concluding chapter, and we go over basically how to use each individual chapter, and then we make a pretty strong call for making sure that we make preschool inclusion, high-quality preschool inclusion, a reality for all children, and that we increase to that hopefully within the next 10 years, we don't wait 30 years perhaps to look at the data again, but that we increase well more than 6% over the next several years, and that all children have high-quality inclusive options for their service delivery system. Oh, and then we have multiple resources. So the website, the first website is the DEC's website, and this is where you can find the recommended practices. And then we also have the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, which is the ECTA Center, and they have multiple resources available for creating high-quality inclusive programs.
Okay, great. Wow, I know that my head's spinning with all that great information. So I have a couple questions. We're starting our Q&A session right now. So if you actually have any questions for the author, make sure to type them in the chat. I have written down a couple for us. Okay, so Dr. Barton, I'm going to start with you. Is there any information on co-teaching in the preschool inclusion toolbox?
So Chapter 4 is where we would talk a little bit about co-teaching.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we definitely, Chapter 4, we talk a little bit about it, and then in the resources, there are multiple resources available and listed in the end of the book that would provide, I believe there's some texts that might be available that go into more detail regarding co-teaching.
Okay, great. And then I'll ask Dr. Smith, it's your turn. In the preschool inclusion toolbox, do you address the needs for any dual language learners?
We don't get to specific teaching strategies or classroom environment strategies. This toolbox, as it says on the cover and the marketing, is really for school district administrative teams to build systems, policies, and procedures. We list a lot of resources in there that those teams then can use that would build high quality classroom practices, like the DEC recommended practices. But
Mhm.
this is really our audience are the administrators and their teams that are building the system of preschool inclusion. Does
Okay.
that make sense? So I
Sounds
wanted to jump in on here because I noticed there were lots of questions, because it follows up on that, around challenging behavior, and whether the toolbox addresses that. Again, the toolbox is looking at the foundational strategies, systems, and procedures that are necessary to have high quality preschool inclusion and to have evidence-based practices take place. It doesn't list every evidence-based practice. It does have resources for that. So for instance, we talk about the pyramid model. The pyramid model is an evidence-based approach and it's similar to a multi-tiered system focused on social skills and behavior. So we would strongly recommend that people go to challengingbehavior.org as one website of 3 you can get to from challengingbehavior.org about the pyramid model. The reason that we talk about the pyramid model in the book related to challenging behavior is there are 2 reasons. One is challenging behavior was one of the challenges that came up in our survey about people's concerns around inclusion. Of course, most challenging behavior is not related to children with disabilities, I would like to point out, but typical kids. But challenging behavior, we are strong proponents of evidence-based strategies that promote social skills and don't just address challenging behavior. We know that if a classroom implements the pyramid model, they will be promoting social skills and preventing almost all challenging behavior. And then the pyramid model also addresses those few instances then of challenging behavior. Once all of those promotional and preventive strategies are in place, there should be very few instances of persistent challenging behavior. So we believe that, first of all, if you're looking for something around challenging behavior, that it be evidence-based, and secondly, that it be promoting social skills and not just trying to put a Band-Aid on challenging behavior.
Okay, great. Thank you, because that definitely was one of the questions that kept popping up. Okay, so I'm going to send this one over to Dr. Barton. Have there been any statistics showing that I'm sorry. Have there been any statistics showing that about people, I guess, who are not choosing to use an inclusive preschool? As in, is it the parents of the children with disabilities that think the preschool is not ready for their child? Or is it the parents of regular attendees of preschool?
You know, I think that there was a belief that that was the case at some point, but we have had multiple studies that have shown that that's not actually true. That parents of children with and without disabilities feel equally positive about inclusive experiences that they've had with their children, regardless of whether or not they had disabilities. I think the key piece to remember is that is whether or not it's a high quality environment.
Okay.
So there, I mean, that's definitely a kind of an urban legend, a belief out there that we hear a lot, but it's not something that's supported by data.
Okay, great. And then I just have a couple more for you. One of the questions we got was from Laurie. She was wondering if one of the most common problems with high quality inclusion is the availability of adequate staffing in the individual classroom. Dr. Smith, I'll send that to you. What do you think?
Well, remember we keep talking about having a team to plan this service system.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the important things to have, some of the important people to have on the team are specialists and regular early childhood teachers. So we believe that I saw that one question was, should we have a special ed teacher on our staff
Yes.
child care center? No. If the public school system is placing a child in your child care center for their IEP, for their education, they can send those specialists to your center to work with your regular early childhood teachers. So itinerant service systems are a really key, important approach to preschool inclusion, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then I will do, I guess, one final question. And then any other questions that we get on the side, what we're going to end up doing is I will have the authors will answer those, and we're going to post those on the EdWeb community. So my last question is going to be to Dr. Barton. Do you have any ideas for students with special needs who need a smaller group size due to sensory behavior, overstimulation, etc., while keeping students fully included?
Well, I'm not exact. So, meaning a smaller
So,
teacher-child ratio,
so,
or
so what they mean is if there are certain students, if they need a smaller group size because of just things like sensory behavior, things like that, what can we do to try to keep them fully included if they can't be in the larger group?
I know exactly what we could do. We could
Okay.
use the pyramid model.
Okay.
as
It's a
our
good way to wrap it up.
Sorry to be so terse, but that's what we could do.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I want to again say thank you to everyone, all of our attendees. You're the reason why there's definitely strides made in preschool inclusion, and especially to our great authors. Thank you so much for all the information that you have provided. So Brooks Publishing, we have sponsored this webinar, so you can keep up to date with us on information about the great Preschool Inclusion Toolbox. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Pinterest, and then we actually have a great blog called the Inclusion Lab, which answers, we put things from the Preschool Inclusion Toolbox and other items. And then I know everyone wants to get their copy of the Preschool Inclusion Toolbox for 20% off. So I'm going to post the link once again in the chat section. That's where you can get the book, and make sure that you're using the code EB120. I know I'm all about the discounts. 20% off is great. Okay, and then obviously we want our certificate of participation to hang in our offices and our preschools. So remember, if you're attending the live presentation, your certificate will be emailed to you within 24 hours. If you are joining the webinar by phone, or if you're watching the recording, you will need to take a CE quiz. And also make sure to join our community, the Brooks Publishing community at edweb.net/inclusive education, because we have we have definitely some webinars that are coming up. And just making sure I hit everything. There's Brooks. And our next webinar will be Thursday, March 31st at 3 p.m. Make sure that you put this in your iPhone and schedule it. It's going to be Recognize, Respond, Report, Preventing and Addressing Bullying of Students with Special Needs, because bullying kind of goes hand in hand at times with inclusion. And that will be presented by Dr. Laurie Ernstberger. And for an invitation to the next webinar, just, again, join our community. And then again, we have at the Teaching All Students, Practical Strategies for Inclusive Classrooms, invitations to upcoming webinars, webinar recordings and resources, CE quizzes, and online discussions. So thank you very much to everyone that has joined us. And again, I will go through and make sure that we haven't missed any questions. If we have, we will post those on the Ed website.